Jaipur Sahodaya School Complex. I welcome our resource person, Sanchita Srivastav ma'am, and all the participants to today's training program on Pedagogy of Storytelling. Ma'am, please start the meeting.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay, ma'am. I'll share my screen and start. Ma'am, is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, ma'am. The slideshow is visible right now. Okay.
We can
So
see.
good evening. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's session on pedagogy of storytelling. Okay. Now, storytelling is actually a form of teaching. Okay, where you can explain the content of the teaching through ways of telling stories. Now, if we see according to the proper definition, storytelling can be a very important form of pedagogy. That means stories imposed, okay, at a minimum temporal logic on the content of the course or lesson. That means what? When things are explained in the form of a story, understanding becomes much clearer. Sometimes when we are dealing with moral values, moral stories with ethical sense, to inculcate these sense, not only the chapters can give a boon to the subject, but storytelling is a very important form of art. It can be a method. Okay, so the temporal logic offers student a metric by which the judge the process of both the story and the lesson content and making them more engaged. Now, sometime when you are reading a book, when you are reading a lesson, if you are doing it in the form of a story, you engage in a better way. Student understand better. Now, see, there are some storytelling techniques. Okay. Now, stories can be interesting. Stories can be very dull. Okay. So, can anybody tell me how can we make stories very interesting to our listeners? Anybody? How can stories be made more interesting to listeners? Yes, anybody? You can use the chat box. How can you make stories very interesting? Because storytelling is an art. It is a way how you display or how you reveal the story, the content of the story among your listeners. Yes. Can anybody tell me how you can make a story interesting? Anybody? Yes, am I audible? Now, you see, storytelling here itself is an art. Okay. It is an art using language, vocalization, and physical movement. That means when you tell a story, literally you narrate the entire incident in such a way that it becomes very, very interesting for the viewers to attend to it. Because if the story that you are delivering, your vocalization is not in a proper way, your body language, even the language you use, the voice tone, the qualities, it is not at all effective to your listeners, right? Now, so it is an art, and it depends on the individuals how well you narrate the story. Now, why tell stories? Why should we be telling stories? Because we all know that storytelling is an art, and it is a very important form to narrate the informations, the beliefs, the values, right? So it is the way how you inculcate these, how well you develop the information and narrate them in front of the children. Now see, in our childhood times, see, some stories were there. Okay, the Ishab's fables were there, the Jatakas, the Panchatantra. Okay, so these were what? These were stories that were having moral values. That means values that you want to inculcate in the children. If they are narrated through these stories, then it is a very effective way. Now, can anybody tell me? Again, I repeat the same question. How can you make a story informative, and how can you make it interesting? Yes. Information can be given through books, information can be given through placards, information can be given in any written format. But why story? Why stories? Right? Can anybody tell me that why should be information given through stories? Yes. Voice modulation and acting, yes, I agree to it, but why should stories be the media by which we can do this? Why not in any other way? Why is it important? It is easy to understand well, it is also, yes, easy to connect. Yes, Pratibha Kumari ma'am, thank you so much. It affects, yes, yes, feels better about social values, definitely. That means what, as you all said, that it is very easy to connect to one another when we are going through stories, right? Because stories are something that will engage, that would engage, and real life stories are very, very important. We have the tales of Jatakas, we have the tales of Panchatantra. Why children these children get hooked to these stories, they get connected. Why? Because they find it very interesting. Yes, because books and story reading, there's a great connection to each other, definitely for entertainment and connect to others, and it is a very easy way. For example, stealing is a very bad habit, right? So we have one bishop's candlestick story where the candlesticks are stolen. Many of you have heard of it. Okay, those who haven't heard of it, please, you can already connect to the Google for that bishop's candlestick, because if I go on narrating the story, it would take much of the time. That means what? It is very easy to connect, and it is a very easy way to relate or deliver the information that you want to give. Fables were there. Even we have that story where the shepherd used to lie about the coming of the tiger. Every day he used to shout, isn't it? Then finally, when day the tiger literally came, nobody believed. Why? Because that person used to tell lies. So that is also a story that gives you an information. That means informations, beliefs, and values can be given through these stories. Okay, now here you see, here are some of the stories that you can relate to, isn't it? We all remember them, we all remember till today. Why? Because these are something, these are ageless stories, right? Because these are remembered by people since time immemorial. But why these stories are like that? Because they have been told in such a way that literally we don't forget, right? Now, even you see, this is a story. This I will show it to you in the later part of my video. But these are something very, very common. Every one of us knows that, isn't it? And these are some characters, which are created in the mind of the children so that they get an impression of things, and you can easily create an impression and values among the children. Now, when we are telling the stories, who can do that? Who can provide stories to the listeners? See, saying, since it is a pedagogical form, obviously we have to take it to the classroom, because storytelling and theater, these has been inculcated in the regular curriculum along with that NEP 2020, right? So here, storytelling is also a part of the main curriculum where we can use it to deliver our content, right? So content are generally, you have those material content, that means that is prescribed in the chapter. So that chapter, if you sometime, instead of reading it, if we are using this method of delivering the content, it is very easy for children to absorb, to understand and relate to it. Now, who is the provider? Who is the provider? That means a person who provides the information. So who can use these methods? We can use it as parents can use this. Teacher, definitely, because here I would give much importance to the teacher, because since we are using the topic pedagogy of storytelling, and even sometimes, librarian can also be a provider for telling stories. Why? Because see, sometimes, we take them, if children are taken to the library, small children, if they are taken to the library, there, the librarian can also be a provider. Now sometimes, even the librarian can use this. Take a story book and read aloud a story to the children who have come to the library. Especially it is for the junior classes. And sometimes, we have community workers. Now community workers, for example, sometimes, that anti-drugs, anti-pollution. Okay, now we have some jingles also, that gadi wala aaya kachra bhagav, like that, na, that those jingles, correct me if I am wrong. Okay, but why these community workers also use these jingles, these small nukkad natak, even we call it in Hindi? Why do we do that? Because it can create a social awareness, and it is very easy to reach to the every people. That connectivity is very easy if we are doing through a drama, for a skit, or anything like that. So here again, as providers, we have the parents, we have the teachers, we have the librarian, we have the community workers who can do that. Now, who is the audience, especially when we are dealing with the topic pedagogy? So pedagogy of storytelling, obviously we have the children as our first and foremost audience. Okay, so a storyteller must know the children for whom the books are intended to. That means whenever you are sharing a story, whenever you are narrating the story among your children, you should know that who your audience are. If you are narrating for a nursery class or a kindergarten children, then that story should be relating or connecting to these children. I should say it is age appropriate. For example, that lion and the mouse story, you cannot go and tell to a secondary or a senior secondary children, because they have already grown up through these. So that means it is very, very important that which story you are selecting and for whom you are selecting that particular story. So selecting the audience or selecting the story as per the appropriate audience is very, very important, and you should know the needs of the audience also. That means if you want to give a moral value to a children of nursery, so those stories, those animated series, or you can read it out, it should be appropriate to those children. If you are doing it for a secondary, if you're doing it for senior secondary, and sometimes, we can use it in the form for, teachers training workshop also. So if you want to narrate something, or sometimes, we can give that career counseling options also. So that time, the story or the role play, what you are going to select should be age appropriate and appropriate audience. So choice of the audience is very, very important. Now, why do we need all this? Because, telling the story is not just to entertain. Okay. But here, a teacher can connect to a student in a very well-mannered way. Okay. So what is the basic need of the children? See, material need is there. That means they need to know, the learning things is there. Then need to belong. If you are for better outcome, definitely, ma'am, definitely for better outcome, I'll definitely go with it. Now you see, need to belong. Then spiritual security. Now sometimes we have in the moral science classes also, we are there, moral science classes or value education, there also, there are so many stories right there, right? So when there are so many stories right there, what will happen? The children will feel connected to it. So they'll give us spiritual security. That means if you do this, if you pray to God, your prayer will be answered. So if those stories where you can give that somebody is there to listen to your things, definitely that spiritual security is always there. And need to be loved and be loved. Definitely, when you are narrating a story, every listener in your classroom will feel connected towards you, right? See, whenever you see a movie, you forget anybody who is beside you, right? Because you are so engrossed, you are so engaged in the story, literally you forget that you have other audience also. So it's the same thing, the same magic, we call it a charismatic effect, the magical effect of the listener is there, and they will connect directly to the teacher or whoever the person is narrating the story. So these are very, very important, the basic need of children, for which you have to formulate a story, or whenever you are deciding some chapters to be taken up as a storytelling, you cannot ignore these parts, because this is the way, you feel very closer, very connected towards your children. Definitely, you create a community of trust and security, a sense of belongingness that should be there when you are dealing with children and with those of storytelling, right? Something is wrong with the network, I think so. Yes. Okay. Now, whenever we are designing a story, it should be designed as per the interest of the child. Okay. So, for example, if we have children 2 years old and below 2 years old, okay, so that time, they don't know literally the alphabets, they will not be able to identify, because even they know ABCD, but just to see that ABCD and just to correlate and read that story, it is just not possible, right? So what will happen, they need the handling of books by looking at the picture and being read to the sound of words. See, this is very, very important. For example, when you are reading aloud a story in a classroom where it is just a primary or pre-primary classroom, they know, they can identify images, isn't it? So if you tell the animal story, they can identify the elephant, they can identify the frog, the fishes, whatever animals they come across every day. So there, those picture reading books, and looking at the picture, if you say the story, it is not only they will understand the story, but they can understand the sound of words. See, sound of words is very, very important. Sound of words in what sense? You see, for example, a lion roars. Okay. So if you modulate your voice and if you literally roar like a tiger, when you are showing the picture of a tiger, then the child will definitely relate to these sounds and they will understand. Dog is barking. The child has seen the dog barking. So if those sounds, see, when some jingles, how many of you can remember that old MacDonald had a farm? Yes. Have you heard of this song? It is a very famous song. Old MacDonald had a farm. Can anybody? Yes. Yes, definitely. It's a very famous song, and mainly all schools, they can do that. So that old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, that song is there. And that song literally has, see, old MacDonald had a farm, and in his farm he had many dogs, right? So it has many dogs, and if you can use it in the picture form, literally the barking of the dogs. Here about, there about, everywhere about, that song is there. So that means what? What do you do to these 2-year-old children and below those years? That means the sound of animals, the way they bark, that behavior of the animal, the child get acquainted to it. That means you can use it for EVS also, the environmental studies. Right. So you see how storytelling can work in a very, very magical way. Then now after 2 to 3 years, by the time the child is 3 years old, the child gets connected to the world around, tries to identify sound of animals also, they are quite acquainted with. Now, 3 to 6 years old, right? So when 3 to 6 years old is there, so they are factual stories. Factual stories, that means they can relate to stories that is very much related to our day-to-day life, isn't it? For example, the stories like there were two cats who were fighting and their monkey came in the middle. They divided the chapati or whatever they were fighting for into two equal halves. So they can relate to it because these are factual stories. And even the nursery rhymes, you see, they are prescribed in their syllabus is definitely based on the factual stories. Now, sometimes, there are stories where a man accidentally eats a bananas and throw the peel on the road and somebody comes and falls down that way. Then, there are some stories like that here we go round the mulberry bush, the rhymes and the jingle, isn't it? So early in the morning we brush our teeth, like that, brush our teeth, comb your hair, and then some like teddy bear, turn around. So these are the thing, that will inspire a 3 to 6 years old child how to that school going habit, isn't it? And the book should be very much illustrative, very much active, and those fancy stories, because 3 years to 6 years, this is the time, when the child fantasizes. The cognitive part of the brain starts developing here. So whenever if you are giving a story, the fanciful ideas, that imaginative part of the brain will come here into activation. That means what? When you are narrating that brainstorming activities and all comes in the later part, but here that fanciful stories will hit the cognitive part. Children learn the values definitely. This is the way. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Pratibha Kumari, ma'am. Thank you. Pratibha Kumar, I think so. Okay. So then so these are something, yes, so many wonderful comments I can see, and thank you so much for being so interactive. If you all are so interactive, it gives me the energy to carry on forward. So that means what? When what I was telling is that 3 to 6 year old children, they can fantasize. Yeah, and that fantasy part comes from the cognitive sector of the domain. We know that three sections of the brain. One is the What are the three sections? Can anybody tell me what are the three sections? Learning sections, 3H formula. Yes. The head, heart, and the hand. So that means first is the cognitive domain, the affective domain, and then the psychomotor. So psychomotor comes in the much later part. But here, the cognitive domain, the thinking, the imagination part, the child starts fantasizing. So here, that fanciful stories are to be given, because by the time the child comes to the age of what do you call it, by the time secondary or senior secondary, they won't fantasize, because they that time, they get connected to the harsh reality. They know there are no fairies, so that they believe, no devils, no imps, okay, elves. So these stories you can give to 3 to 6 years. Now when you come to 6 to 7 year old, analyze, yes, definitely the cognitive part analyzes what is the truth and they can relate to it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, then that when the child comes to the age of 6 to 7 year old, so the 6 to 7 year old, they come to those Jataka tales, the Ishab fables, the funny stories, where they can relate to it. They can enjoy the story in a very different way. And 6 to 7 years old, that role play model can also be a different way of pedagogy, where you can make the children enact and they can relate to it. So here we came across 2 years to approx 6 to 7 years. Okay. Yes, Pratibha Kumar. Thank you so much. Accept the fact. Yes. Because by the time they grow their age, that cognitive section of the brain gets much more developed. The imaginative portion of the brain, they also gets developing. And by the time, the logical thing, that logical analysis comes into activity, by the time the child comes to 8 to 18. 8 to 18, that means we come across that middle school, secondary, senior secondary, that entire thing, the analyzing part of the brain becomes more active than the fantasizing part, right? So they accept the reality, they know what is the fact, and they become much more, what you call it, the real factual things, they are getting more used to it. So there, that logical thing, the critical analysis, and somewhere, that values, moral values are somehow have become the part of the grooming of the children, because a class 7 or a class 8 children, they know what is good and that what is bad. So you don't have to teach a class standard 7 children good and bad, but they already know. But their behavior management is also very, very important, because that is the time, they need to know how to behave. So we can formulate stories, rather we can arrange or we can decide stories from their moral science books or value education book, so that they become a much more responsible and a disciplined individual in the future. Because see, academics is something that is very, very basic, and that is what we schools are, isn't it? This is the reason for which we schools are there, for the give the academic assistance. But not only the academic assistance could be given in a better way if sometimes we can use this in the pedagogy, right? So that is what today's session is. Yes, channelizing them. We need to channelize them to a right track. Definitely. Okay, so that is what is the need of the hour. So that means whenever you are formulating a story, whenever you are thinking of something to be delivered in a story form or the dramatized form, we can use this as a platform. Now, for example, class 9, The Kingdom of Fools. How many of you have read that chapter, The Kingdom of Fools? It's in the English syllabus. Yes, can anybody tell me how many of you have read that? Kingdom of Fools. English chapter. It is there. The Kingdom of Fools. Yes, Surinder Giri. Okay. Anybody else? That Kingdom of Fools. Now, what is there in the Kingdom of Fools? You see that it is a foolish kingdom. Only one. I'm not getting proper reaction from you all. Only one. Yes, yes. Two more, three more. Thank you so much. That means many of you, yes, many of you have read that chapter or taken that chapter. Those who are from the English department, definitely you all have seen that it is the kingdom of food. So what happens in the kingdom of foods? I'll just narrate the story in a very short way. That it is a story. It is in the English syllabus. So in the kingdom of foods, what happens? A king is there, and the entire kingdom does things in a different way. That means that nocturnal and diurnal, we are active during the day, but they are active during the night. So that makes a difference. So one guru and his disciple happens to visit that, and once the guru enters the kingdom, he asks his disciple that we should at once leave, because things that is happening around is all because of the foolishness. The ruler himself is a foolish person, but he refused to it. Then they went under a long process. They went under life imprisonment, and sometimes they had lastly they had a narrow escape. So they escaped from that city, and finally the moral of the story is you can never trust a fool, isn't it? So if or your leader should never be fooled. So whoever is doing that, ruling the country, should be a wise one. Because I cannot take the entire story. So if you want, you can search it in the Google or go to your English classroom. Andher Nagari Chopadade, exactly, Shobha Kumari. Thank you, ma'am. Exactly, this is what the thing is, the moral of the story is. So that means till so far we know that whenever we are analyzing, they decide to change the day to night. Definitely. That means I'm so happy with everybody that you can relate to what I am saying. That means what? Your story, your content, or whatever you think of, it should be age appropriate. Right? Okay. Now, how there are ways by which you can tell the story to the children, because there are various ways. Okay, since we are talking about techniques, what are the ways? So you see, storytelling. Yes, as the king, so are the subject. Amritanshu. Yes, thank you so much. So you are absolutely correct. Now you see, storytelling, story reading, story living, and read aloud. So what are these? These are actually the 4 ways. Okay, these are the 4 ways how you can deliver a story or narrate a story to the children. Okay, so what is storytelling? What is storytelling? Storytelling is somebody when you tell a story. For example, I was telling the story of the foolish kingdom. I did 2 to 3 lines only, but the way I explain or why I narrated comes under the heading of storytelling. Now, to small children. To small children, see, in our times, we had grandparents who used to read the story to us. That means from the book, if somebody is reading, so that is story reading. And when story reading, if it is a very picture book or something like that, children who cannot read properly, children who cannot read, they can also connect to you. So they'll hear to you reading the story. And storytelling is somebody just telling a story. You know what storytelling is. So there are 2 ways. Either you tell a story or you read a story. That means reading aloud from the book, or if you are just telling the story in a form of an event, or if you are narrating, it is a storytelling. Now, what is story living? Now, here it is another thing, that is story living. So, what is story living actually is? Story living is something, where literally you enact the story, you live the story right at that moment. Isn't it? What motion picture the Bollywood is doing? We have to tell children in a very interesting manner. Yes, Ranjan Joseph, thank you. So, story living is something, yes, enter into the character. Definitely, story living is you have to enter into the character, or in one word, I would say it is a role play. Isn't it? If we enact the story, it is story. Yes, a role play or a drama. Monica, thank you so much. So, story living. Now, sometimes, what is read aloud? read aloud. See, story living, we come across that story living is when you are enacting a particular thing, that is, you are living the story. Now, what is read aloud? Yes, read aloud. What does read aloud here? That means anybody, please. I want the answer from you all. So excellently, you have been in the chat box. Please, what does read aloud means? How is it an important technique in storytelling? Pronunciation skill. Yes, pronunciation skill. Definitely, Pratima Kumari. Thank you so much. So pronunciation skill is okay. But you know, sometimes you can read a story with full voice modulation and everything. So that means literally, if you are reading a story in that condition, you are reading it aloud, definitely it is something very, very different. And the children will connect to you, because if you just start telling that there lived a lion in the jungle and there he was taking a round in the jungle, nobody will pay attention, because the story should be interacting and as well as interesting. Yes, improve the reading skill. Definitely reading skills also improve, because see full voice with a full excitement. Definitely that means read aloud is something also you can create. You can create an environment where the literally the characters come alive with story reading, right? Now sometimes, you know, when we are reading a book, not sometimes, every time we are reading a book, whenever we are reading a book, especially we are going through some, see, for Leo Tolstoy. Okay, let me just take it for an example. So when we are reading a taking a look or reading a storybook written by Leo Tolstoy or something like that, literally you can visualize what is happening in the story. So that credit goes to the novelist who has written that particular story, right? So when you are reading aloud, your voice modulation, your body language, everything would be, yes, the flow should be there. Yes, punctuations, definitely. You need, and if you are just reading it blunt, it is just a bad reading, right? So that is how, when you are reading it aloud, it creates an environment. The way you picturize, the student will also be able to picturize the way you are telling the story. Now you see, storytelling, when you are telling the story, there are oldest ways to a story and oldest form of literature. Yes, because earlier, you know, those of you are coming from pronunciation and sound. Yes, so those of you who can relate to this, for example, history background I'm talking of, can anybody tell me that how did those Rig Vedas were translated from or it was carried out from one generation to other generation? I'm talking of the Rig Vedas. Can anybody see? Rig Vedas were transferred from one generation to another. So how was this possible? One generation to other generation. The Vedas, literally it was Shruti. You know what is Shruti? They used to hear. Okay, hear and remember, because there was no literally, yes, vocal. So it was Shruti. Shruti means what? They used to listen to the story or listen to the entire hymns. You know, those hymns, those they are in the form of song, in the form of song. Okay, so those hymns were written. They listen and remember it. There was no written script that time. Okay, so that is the oldest way to a story, and they were given or narrated generations to generation. Then, you know, these, what was Shruti becomes Smriti. You know what is Smriti? You keep in memory. So for that Smriti, we have, you know, those ancient scriptures. So after that Shruti, you know, that Smriti section, when it came, they started writing them. Those stories were written literally. So when they were written, we people could remember, and they were, then came the theory of library form, the oldest one. You know, they used to write them in Tamralipta. You know, that palm leaf, they used to write all the Buddhist scriptures and our ancient Vedic scriptures. They are written on that. Later on, with the change of time, you know, those written stories were written on copper. They were written on copper plates. And you know, later that Ashoka edict, Can anybody tell me what is there written in the edict? What was written on the rock edict, Ashoka edict, or the Sharnath pillar? Yes, Sharnath pillar edict, EDICT edicts. What are those? Anybody? What do you have on those rock edicts? Because yes, anybody? Rock edicts is actually, they are stories of victory of the kings that time. So they, instead of keeping it anywhere, they used to write it on rocks. So those were the oldest form of literature, and Indian oldest literature, we have two great epics. Inscriptions, yes, inscriptions are there. Inscriptions were the first form. Then there are so many inscriptions, that is written for that Buddhist language. But many of us till today, we cannot make it out what it was written. But it was written in Pali and Prakrit. But I don't know how far it has been taken to it. There are good number of edicts, rock edicts. Still, nobody could relate to it. Even some of those edicts, written in the Indus Valley civilization time also, they had written. See, script writing was there. The manuscript written, yes, Paramita Kumari, script writing definitely is there. But in all those times, there are so many scripts, especially the Indus Valley people had written something, because these are oldest form of literature. They are still there. But we could not translate what is written to that. Only we could know that it was written in raised pictography, right? So from there came the idea of storytelling. Now, stories that are ideal for storytelling are stories with verbal humor. Yes, unable to decipher safely. Yes, definitely, you are absolutely correct. So stories that are ideal for storytelling, what are the stories you want to tell, or what are those ideal stories that need to be told? See, stories with verbal humor. See, you have to connect to children, and the children should find interest to it. Now, for example, see, Mahatma Gandhi was a father of the nation, and definitely that nationalism, the stories of nationalism are definitely very, very, with great regard and respect to all those who fought for our nation. But when you are narrating these stories to a nursery child, it won't be age appropriate, isn't it? Now, Jhansi Ki Rani, that entire episode, class 2 to class 7, everybody literally knows that. Yes. So that means what? The age appropriate one. Now, storytelling, there should be some verbal humor to it. Now, stories with repetitive line. See, again, if we relate to that poem, Jhansi Ki Rani. So they are repetitive lines. Khoob ladi mardani, wo to Jhansi ki wo Rani thi, isn't it? So that particular lines, those are always there, and definitely this is repetitive. So some things, when they are repetitive, it creates an impression again on the brain. That means children can count to it. See that old, very common, to twinkle, twinkle, little star. We use the word twinkle, twinkle, right? Then that Baba black sheep, double words, Baba black sheep, twinkle, twinkle, little. Why do we do that? That means through these are not only jingles, these are not only poems, but they give an idea of the sound of a sheep in Baba black sheep, and how the stars twinkle in the night, in the very easiest 4-line poems, right? So that is how they are giving that. Now, personal tales. Now, what are personal tales? Yes, Johnny, yes, Papa, yes, Bindya Subha. Thank you so much. And I'm really happy to see how actively you all are participating. Thank you so much for your active participation. Then any more? See if I'm having so many. Anything else? Anything else? That repetitive one. Yes? A repetitive one. See, personal tales we have. Now, what are personal tales? We can have, for example, the story of Jesus. Story of Jesus, every Christmas time, every time we can have these stories being, and we are having already during, and even those Janmashtami. See, 7th is Janmashtami, 6th, every school, majority of the school, those role play. The story of Janmashtami, that Krishna, that birth of Krishna and all that. That scenes, small children, rain, go away. Definitely that gives you the idea that way if it is raining, you cannot go out to play. Now, what I was telling, that personal tale, the Krishna, these are all role models, So that when they are enacted in the school, that is also a storytelling, isn't it? Lord Krishna, some small children, they are dressed up like Lord Krishna during Christmas. Small children, they are the yes, Sita Devi, Baba Black Sheep already have said with that. Thank you so much. So, Chota Bheem. So that is on the digital media. Two little hands go clap, clap, clap. Jitendra Kumar, extremely. Thank you so much. Very correct. So these are the things, see, I can connect with you so nicely, and that storytelling part, half I'm successful in my work. Yeah, Mowgli, yes, definitely. Mowgli story is also there. The animal sound is there. So what I was telling of personal tale, I was talking of Krishna. Then, I was talking of baby Christ or baby Jesus. So when these are enacted, the mythological story of the birth of Lord Krishna, then the mythological tale, the birth of Jesus, our Savior, so well it goes into the children. Yes, the jingle bell, these are something, that brings happiness among everybody. Hearing the jingle bell, we know that New Year is coming, and it brings the spirit of joy. Yes, Lion King. So these are, the tales, personal tales. Okay. Then story of Bhagat Singh, definitely story of Bhagat Singh. Yes. And then the supernaturals. What is supernatural? What is supernatural things? Prince and the Pauper. Yes. Then anything, any supernatural story? Yes, Jingle Bells, Spider-Man. Yes, Spider-Man is something, a supernatural character, and every children, by the time they come to 5 or 6, Phantom, they are very much obsessed. Those Phantom stories and Mandrake, Avengers. Yes, these are the latest hits. Yes, those Marvel. Yes, thanks to that Marvel and all that, because these are something, Aladdin, yes, definitely. Those are supernatural things. And the child starts fantasizing. I have seen small children in Thor, yes. That Thor is also Thor, Loki. These are all something, these are Shaktiman was a bit our time stories, right? Yes. So these are stories about supernatural people. Chota Bheem is there, but that is entirely in the digital media, right? Okay. Now you see, I have, yes, Tom and Jerry. Yes, Tom and Jerry. It's we see it is a living story, right? From our time to even Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, the characters. These are created by Walt Disney, but they are legend, isn't it? So these are legendary characters that has been created, and they have become so popular that still today children can relate to it. See, Tom and Jerry, that Jerry Mouse, who is always in a way tricking that Tom. Tom suppose Masha and the bear. Yes, it is the latest one, isn't it? So these are the some things, that gives a moral value to it. DuckTales, yes. Cinderella, yes, definitely the story of Cinderella. It is Dennis the Dennis the Menace. Yes, definitely. The chat box is Hercules. Yes, definitely. So chat box is overflowing with all your responses, and I'm really overwhelmed. Augie, yes, Augie, and that 7 drop Cinderella is there. Yes, yes, 7 drop story is also there. Thank you so much. Now you see, when you are preparing for storytelling, how do you do that? See, when you are doing narrating a story, you have to read the entire story 3 or 4 times yourself. Then when you have read the story, you internalize the basic storyline. Story के अंदर में क्या है? It should be within you. अपने पूरे जहन में लेके चले जाइए. And read it aloud to familiarize yourself with certain expression, repetition and phrasing. कैसे बोलना है, कहाँ रुकना है. Sometimes how do you repeat a thing and how do you phrase it up? Okay, it is very, very important. How do you do that? Then finally, what portions need to be modified? See and practice. Now, sometimes, a part of the story, if you are reading it right, sometimes it might not be appropriate for a children. For example, a person kills another person, right? So that you cannot present that in a form. You can modify that where the person is killed. You can hide that person somewhere, that wo person kahin chala gaya, uske baad nahi dikha. So these are something, you cannot create scare, tension among your children. So these are something how you have to prepare yourself for the storytelling. You need to read the entire story 3 or 4 times. You need to internalize the basic storyline, then read it aloud to familiarize yourself with certain expression, repetition, and which portion need to be modified. Please modify that, and you need to practice. Now, when you are presenting a story, how do you do that? Make sure our audience and listeners are comfortable with it, isn't it? Listeners can hear you properly. Now, see, whenever you are talking to somebody, one-to-one talk, or whenever you're in a classroom, see, eye contact with the listener is very, very important. So, consciously use pitch, stress, junction, and pace to create and sustain the mood. That means if you want to create a suspense, see, for example, the TV serials you see, at the correct point, they'll take a break and they'll say, they'll cut the episode, will continue the next day. That means what? They want to create suspicion and the mood, and the audience will be hooked up till the other day. Then confidential tone, kisi se nahi bolna, right? So these are the way, the story dictates otherwise. Then articulate clearly and keep the story moving. It should be going on in a flow. Now, while reading a story, use of big books is ideal for kindergartens. Now go through the story and talk the illustration page by page. That means when you are reading a story, you have to go through it page by page and read each page aloud. Point to each word and encourage the children to read aloud with you. Sometimes, one of you had mentioned earlier that when you are reading aloud and when you are asking the children to read with you, you are creating a reading habit among the children, right? Now pause every now and then. So that is known as the punctuation. Okay. And then allow them to read by themselves if they continue reading aloud, if they hesitate or falter. That means you can create a reading habit among the children. Do this over and over again and experience their joy in learning to read. So that means you can create self-learners by practicing this at the very early childhood. See, sometimes, especially those post-COVID time, class 7, class 8 children, you see, they'll fumble while reading, right? Have you seen or not? I don't know, but I have seen in many places children have after 2 years, the of that COVID, the children that who are especially in the 7th and 8th classes, 7 and 8 classes, it is very difficult to correct their reading. But if you ask them to read nowadays, children, because that gapping of the COVID, has destroyed many places, many sectors, if not all. Then make certain that the illustrations are visible to all. When the pictures are there, whenever you are making an illustration, it is, and share the story in one sitting, right? Whenever you are taking a class or you are enacting something, the story should be shared at a one single setting. Now story living, story living, you see that puppet, use of props like puppets, okay, then chalkboard, dramatization, role play, these are all story living. Now what are the tips for these? You have to identify and practice the voice change. For example, if you are doing a role play, that voice modulation should be there, appropriate gesture that make the story live. Then identify and practice the use of props, the best catch, the plot, the characters, and the mood. That means it should be all appropriate and related to your role play. Now practice the sequencing of cumulative tales so that sharing is smooth and invites the participation of the children, isn't it? That means make sure that stories, they are related to them and you can make a large number of participation of the children. Now, when you are reading aloud, for example, in the house, read aloud starts at home. So there are special sessions where parents or the caregivers take time to read the children with ages from 0 to preschool age. So we can do that during the some of the PTM, we can organize. Parents management is also a very important part. So that time what we can do is that we can arrange them and we can make sessions for the parents so that they are given these tasks so that the children can connect to their parents as well, isn't it? Because parents nowadays have very less time for the children. So by storytelling, because this is something that is fading away nowadays, that mobile is also there and the TV is there. So cartoon laga diya, bacha busy ho gaya, right? So that means the connectivity, the bonding that is created through reading a story aloud to the children is missing nowadays. So these parents can also be asked to do that along with the children. Now, being reading to children as soon as possible, the younger one starts, the better. That means when you are reading the story to the children, if they develop the habit, then what they will do, that when there is nobody to read them the story, they'll open the book and they will simply go over the pages, the younger ones. That means you already give them the habit, the sustainable habit of self-readers, right? Now, use Mother Goose rhyme song to stimulate. I see nursery jingles are already there. Now, simply but boldly colored picture books. See, small children books, they are so colorful. And sometimes, paper binding also is very, very necessary. The book should be attractive, right? Read as often as you and the child have time for. Remember that the art of listening is acquired once and it must be taught and cultivated gradually. See, children should be good listeners right from the beginning. So that is the reason the storytelling is the best way and it is very much better as early as you become. Okay. Now start with picture books and go to story books. Rhymes and jingles, there are so many well-known rhymes for that. Occasionally read about the children's intellectual level and challenge their minds. Yes, definitely children, the story should not be confusing. ऐसा स्टोरी नहीं होना है जो बच्चों में को समझ ही ना आए. So that means it should be age appropriate and always matching to the intellectual level of the children. Remember that reading aloud comes naturally to very few people. To do it successfully, you must practice. See, whenever we are teachers, we shouldn't be that we are all perfect storytellers, we are perfect role player, not like that. So sometimes, it is not bad to sometimes see, and the self judgment is also that the हम जो ये कर नहीं सकते, there's no harm in admitting that. और अगर कुछ कमी है, तो there is always the word practice that will make you a perfect. So read slowly enough. See, this is very, very important. When you are reading a story to the children, you should be reading it in a pace so that the child can relate to you. Okay. Led by example, make sure that the children see you read for pleasure than read aloud time. Sometimes, children are allowed to read 2 1s are 2, 2 2s are 4, that that monotonous tone. But children should also know that the art of reading it in a proper way. Now you see, this is very, very important. A book is good for everybody, but if the children enjoys it, then only, isn't it? A book is a poor book for children even when the adult rate it as a classic if children are not able to read and enjoy it. That means books and other things would be equally appropriate for the children and they can relate to it, right? Now I want to show you something. Here's a story. Okay.
Ma'am, Sanchita ma'am, it's not audible, ma'am.
This video is not audible.
No, ma'am.
Okay. I there must be some sort of a network issue. But I've come to the end of the session. And thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Okay.
And thank you, ma'am. It was a very
Thank you.
nice session, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. But somewhere some technical issues, I think, was there, so that video was not audible. Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.